In this lesson, you will examine a video case study of knowledge construction in action. We are going to Loretto College School in Toronto, Canada, where resource teachers Diane Vautour and Danielle Papulin worked with a senior level English class. This video presents a unit of work from Diane and Daniel's senior level English class in a school in Canada. As part of the unit plan, Diane and Daniel's class of 17-year-old girls studied poetry through the lens of resistance with a view to writing a spoken word poem of choice that pushes against issues of oppression.
When Mary Shelley was 16, she invented science fiction.
The unit culminated with participation in a Skype video conference with classes across Canada and spoken word artists from Egypt and the United States. During this global conference, students had a chance to recite their poems and receive feedback. The objectives of the unit were as follows. Provide students with the opportunity to investigate social issues and solutions and to address them through poetry. Make connections with the real world to explore resistance and social change. Build upon the school's specialist high skills major programme that has a non-profit focus by having students address social issues, injustice and oppression through poetry and sharing their work with an international audience. And connect to real-world professions by bringing in literary experts to act as portfolio panellists who will assess and provide feedback for students as they continue to revise their work. The unit of work comprised of 6 lessons which took place over a 3-week period. In the first lesson, students learned about the history of spoken word poetry and the beginning of poetry slam competitions. They also learned what makes a successful slam poem.
Welcome to the Poetry Slam. Here's how it works. Poets, you have 3 minutes to perform one original poem of your own construction. No props are allowed, no costumes are allowed, no animal acts are allowed. No musical accompaniment other than the music you can create with your own body will be allowed. Each poem will be scored on a scale of 0.0 to 10.0 by our panel of 5 judges who have been selected from the audience. Judges, please consider the content and the performance of the poems. The only really important thing is that you tell us what you think. Poetry Slam is about the idea that everybody has a valid opinion about art and you don't need some degree or credential to prove it.
Diane and Daniel used a TED Talk by Harry Baker, the 2012 World Grand Slam Poetry Champion, to teach the students about spoken word poetry. As part of his TED Talk, Baker recited a number of poems. Using a teacher-designed template, students were instructed to analyse these poems in terms of style, structure and performance. They were also asked to rate the poems out of 10 and to explain why they awarded a particular mark. On completion of this activity, the class collectively discussed and defined a set of success criteria for a successful spoken word poem. In Lesson 2, students were introduced to the concept of resistance poetry, and they investigated how different elements of resistance are tackled through spoken word poetry. The class began by discussing and defining resistance art with the students. Once they understood the concept of resistant art, the remainder of the class was structured like a slam poetry event. To do this, students were given a Prezi presentation. Embedded in the Prezi were a number of videos featuring poets performing poems which placed emphasis on discrimination based on gender and race, disparity of wealth and power, and confronting death and failure. Students were asked to view and rate a number of these poems. They were also asked to comment on a poem's ability to resist, comment on one aspect from the success criteria that they found was especially effective in the poem, identify and explain which slam poem best exemplified resistance art, identify and explain which was their favourite slam poem based on the performances, and continue to revise their success criteria of a successful word poem. Like before, once the class had completed this activity, the students collectively discussed and outlined the success criteria of a successful resistance poem. This set of criteria was later used to develop the assessment rubric that was used to evaluate the students' final poems. Following these lessons, the students were presented with an assignment in which they were asked to write and present a spoken word poem of choice that pushes against issues of oppression. To do this, students had to select a resistance topic of choice and then to create a PowerPoint presentation that demonstrated their knowledge of that issue and why resistance is needed. The PowerPoint had to include images, graphs, statistics, quotes, and anything else deemed necessary to provide an in-depth perspective of the issue in question. Students then shared these presentations in small groups. Using a teacher-designed checklist, they provided feedback to each other. Students received copies of the checklists at the end of the lesson, and they could use these to self-assess their presentation style and content. At this point, the students also collectively created a rubric that outlined the success criteria that would be utilised for assessment. The students had approximately 1 week to craft their spoken word poem. During this, 2 spoken word experts conducted mini workshops with the students. While a Skype call was conducted with Professor Daniel Scott Tisdale.
With Cupid, it's like I was in love, so it's like being struck by an arrow in my heart. Well, you could imagine, what if that literally happened, right? Now suddenly you have this arrow stuck in you, it's hard to put on a shirt. You try to hug someone and they get hit with the arrow. So you can also have fun with cliches by taking them literally.
Both provided insight on how to begin and successfully craft a spoken word poem. And students were encouraged to question them about the writing process and to seek advice towards overcoming the barriers they were encountering while writing their spoken word poems.
How do you do rhyming? Because half the time when I do rhyming, it just goes in a horrible train wreck that flies out the window in a flaming ball of death.
Okay, it kind of works like this. So, the way my brain kind of works is like I see chair, and then I think care, bear, snare, and you just kind of go like that, like super simple. So
students revised their work based on this feedback, as well as on feedback from Daniel and Diane. In the penultimate lesson, students performed their resistance spoken word poem in front of their peers, who provided feedback according to the success criteria established in class. Final revisions were made based on this feedback. The final activity in the unit of work was participation in a video conference organised by the Centre for Global Education and that addressed the use of poetry as a means of resistance. During the conference, students heard from a young revolutionary in the Middle East and a poet from the United States as they shared their poetry about transition and injustice. They were also given the opportunity to share their poem and receive feedback from individuals living thousands of miles away.
We were never meant to be that South Sea cold type of delicate. We were born outshine the sun.
Please watch the video again and make note where you see evidence of knowledge construction. Jot these down and make notes of what level you would code it and why.
Well, it made me feel emotional. You can't really judge emotional in that sense. What did they say that made you feel emotional? That's my
With the rubber mat burning. When Mary Shelley was 16, she invented science fiction.
Put my laptop and they just looked at me and I didn't know what to do. So I just sort of said, and I tried to be as engaging as possible, and I think it worked. It was really effective, and I don't know, it was a lot of fun.
apology, she stood before the United Nations and told them how her country was burning. When Mary Shelley was 16, she invented science.
Eugene, Oregon. Anna does not know how to read Oregon Spanish.
Try to put some like aspects of like things that would make it make sense, and at so many like different points. That's a valuable lesson. That's for sure. For sure. So at first I was like really disappointed in his feedback, but now I look back at it and it's really positive, and I'm happy that he gave that to me because it really changed me as a writer. Different takeaway arts such as conceptual art, reveal inclusism, and just repetition.
Right? For example, like we say, like, you know, with Cupid, it's like, I was in love, so it's like being struck by an arrow in my heart. Well, you can imagine, what if that literally happened, right? You know, suddenly you have this arrow stuck in you, it's hard to put on a shirt. You know, you try to hug someone and they get hit with the arrow. So you can also have fun with cliches by taking them literally.
Sorry, again. I noticed in your poem rap song about music, it was really good. You had rhyming, sort of, in this rap. How do you do rhyming? Because half the time when I do rhyming, it just goes in a horrible train wreck that flies out the window in a flaming ball of death.
Okay, it kind of works like this. So, like, the way my brain kind of works is like I see chair, and then I think care, bear, snare, and you just kind of go like that. That's super simple. So, some people use like sources, some people use dictionaries, but I usually just pick a word, and then in my head I think about all the words that rhyme with it, and then like, if it's chair, then it's care. I'm like, is care and chair the best fit?
Great-grandma for believing that beauty is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. You and I have been learning how to sift through the remnants of our own ancestors, searching for that type of word that fit us both. It's just that sometimes words too get stuck between your teeth and you forget that it's even there. And when we stretch out our arms to excavate this sense of wholeness that your mother and her mother never taught us, we end up concealing what it is we have been searching for. We are built for this kind of heroism. We were never meant to be that South Sea Pearl type of delicate. We were born to outshine the sun.
We are now going to look at this video once more. This time, it will highlight evidence of the different levels of knowledge construction. See how they compare to what you noted. In the previous video, you saw how two teachers, Diane and Daniel, carried out a unit of work in which their senior level English class studied poetry through the lens of resistance art with a view to writing a spoken word poem of choice. This video is also based on this unit of work, but it examines how the students constructed knowledge as they engaged with resistance art. As a reminder, when examining a unit of work for knowledge construction, the following questions are asked. Does the activity require knowledge construction? Is the main requirement knowledge construction? Are students required to apply their knowledge in a new context? And is the learning activity interdisciplinary? Knowledge construction activities require students to generate ideas and understandings that are new to them. Students can do this through interpretation, analysis, synthesis, or evaluation. For example, in the first lesson, the students examined a selection of spoken word poems in order to analyse the poems in terms of style, structure, and performance. They also had to evaluate these poems by rating them out of 10 and explaining why they had awarded each mark. On completion of this activity, the students synthesised their findings in order to define a set of success criteria for a successful spoken word poem. In the same way, in Lesson 2, the students analysed and evaluated a number of resistance spoken word poems before synthesising the success criteria of a successful resistance poem. Because both of these lessons required the students to generate understandings that were new to them, they were constructing knowledge. In the same way, in Lesson 3, students had to research a topic of choice and then create a PowerPoint presentation that demonstrated their knowledge of that issue and why resistance is needed. In this instance, students are not simply reproducing information, but they must interpret the information found in order to highlight issues of oppression and the need for resistance. This is knowledge construction. In stronger activities, knowledge construction is the main requirement of the learning activity. The main requirement is the part of the activity that students spend the most time and effort on, and the part that educators focus on when grading. Knowledge construction was clearly the main requirement in the unit of work developed by Diane and Daniel. As outlined, knowledge construction was a requirement in the first 3 lessons. Students then used this knowledge to write and present a spoken word resistance poem of choice in the remaining 3 lessons. In addition, knowledge construction was a key element of the final assessment rubric. Quality of research and quality of thinking about resistance formed 2 out of 4 categories in this rubric. Students must apply the knowledge they have constructed to support another knowledge construction task in a new context. In this unit of work, students constructed knowledge about spoken word poems and resistance art. They then had to apply what they had learnt to write and perform a resistance spoken word poem.
We were never meant to be that South Sea Pearl type of delicate. We were born to outshine the sun.
To successfully do this, students had to use interpretation, analysis, synthesis, or evaluation to decide how to use what they had learnt in a new context. Interdisciplinary learning activities have learning goals that involve content, important ideas, and methods from different academic subjects. Studies of equity and social justice are part of the social sciences curriculum in Canada. In this unit of work, the quality of the students' research, as well as the quality of their thinking in relation to resistance, was assessed as part of the final assessment of their spoken word poem. The work unit is therefore considered to be interdisciplinary. So to conclude, the work unit carried out by the students in Daniel and Diane's class is coded at a 5. This is because the unit required knowledge construction was the main requirement, students were required to apply their knowledge in a new context, and the learning activity was interdisciplinary. Now that we've examined knowledge construction in action and looked at how we can apply the 21 CLD rubric to design a learning activity to help develop students' knowledge construction skills, what sort of learning activity could you create to help develop your students' knowledge construction skills? In this lesson, we have looked at knowledge construction in action. In the next lesson, we will look at how you can create knowledge construction in the context of some 21 CLD anchor lessons.